welcome to the Startup Grind. Well, Eric Eldon grew up in the Pacific Northwest. He attended Stanford University, among other things, where he ran the Stanford Daily. He co-founded a YC-funded company called Right With in 2005. He then joined VentureBeat and co-founded Inside Network, which later sold for more than $15 million and change. He is currently the co-editor of TechCrunch, the largest, most influential, biggest tech blog of all time. Please give a big Startup Grind welcome for Eric Eldon. Here we go. Welcome.
Thank you.
This is serious. We've got the police lights here.
I know.
We're ready to go.
I think this is my first time getting interviewed on stage.
Yeah, well, thanks for doing it. We appreciate it. Well, we at Startup Grind, we like to just start out and kind of just get to know you a little bit. Tell us a little bit about where you grew up. Tell us about your family and, you know.
So I was born and raised in Corvallis, Oregon, which is Oregon State University, if you're familiar, the Beavers.
Sure.
In the Pac-10, Pac-12, whatever it's called these days.
Yep, Nike.
Grew up a little ways out in the country, so had this like interesting hybrid country college town experience. I guess I gotta hold this.
You want to stand? We can do stands.
And yeah, you know, my dad actually grew up down here, and we would come down to Silicon Valley to visit family during the summers and holidays, and I was like, this place is amazing. You know, there's all of the tech companies I've read about are here, you know, and like my grandpa worked for HP for a long time.
Huh.
And
what was he doing? What did he do for HP?
He did a lot of different things. I think he was like the 250th employee.
Wow.
And he did engineering, ran some manufacturing, a bunch of different jobs. So I basically, you know, had sort of all of this Silicon Valley stuff in the background, but my parents weren't, and definitely not in the tech industry. My dad had a produce market when I was born, eventually became a public school teacher. My mom, you know, had some odd jobs, but raised me and my brother and sister, and then went back to school and became a speech therapist. So yeah, so I have Silicon Valley roots in some ways, but it's also like totally foreign to my immediate.
And what was the expectation for you? Was it, I mean, did you, because you're really, the one thing that makes you very unique in the, kind of in the, you know, blogger world is that you're actually more of an entrepreneur, I would say, than I would define you as an entrepreneur. What do you define yourself as? Are you an entrepreneur? Are you a blogger?
I try to be some of each, like a journalist entrepreneur.
Okay.
If I may.
You
Which
may.
is a terrible place to be. I would say, yeah, I'm trying, like, I really care about media organizations. I really care about trying to build media companies that can push the world forward and not just generate link bait. TechCrunch is guilty of that sometimes, I know. But I've always cared about that, and, you know, I think when it was sometime like freshman, sophomore year of college, and I was like seeing, you know, at that time I was very politically active, and I was upset by a lot of the political things that were happening at the time, and I was upset by the news coverage, and I was like, there's got to be like better ways to use the internet to shape how the news works and to get more information out there and to help more people participate. And you know, at that point I was like writing a lot of my college paper and was enjoying that, and was like, okay, I can actually make sort of an impact this way. But I was watching the decline of the newspaper industry, and at that point, you know, like, it was this really weird time in Silicon Valley and in the world, right? It's like 2002, 2003, 2004. We, you know, got into 2 wars. It was a housing bubble. You guys were all there, obviously. And Silicon Valley at that point had a terrible, terrible hangover from the dot-com bubble. And, you know, a lot of people were going through this like very soul-searching experience, like, what is tech? The New York Times wrote this very widely read article about how all like engineering jobs are getting outsourced and nobody had, you know, Silicon Valley was just going to be in ruins, you know, by the end of the decade.
Yeah.
And I remember, like, you know, by 2005, I was starting to, like, you know, I was like, a lot of these ideas in my head, I was like, okay, I got to figure out what's really going on in Silicon Valley. Like, all of my Stanford friends were like trying to become professors or iBankers or lawyers or whatever, which is what a lot of them are doing now. And I was like, I want to figure out what's going on in Silicon Valley. I didn't do engineering. Like, I was just like, I'm going to start going to meetups. And you would go to these meetups, and you would talk to these, guys who were like, really felt like they were crawling out of holes and being like, men and women, and who were like, hey, I think this internet thing, I don't think it's quite dead yet. Like, I heard of this one site that has a bunch of traffic, and well, there's Google and there's PayPal, and there's a few other things that were still around, but you started hearing more and more anecdotes about, basically developers who were building stuff, and it was getting traction, and the internet was actually going somewhere. And that was, I think TechCrunch started in like 2005. May of 2005. Yeah, and that was like exactly I started looking into stuff in 2004, and like I heard about TechCrunch a few months
Perfect
after
timing.
It launched. Yeah, and I don't like the 20,000th RSS subscriber or something.
Oh wow.
Yeah, it was back in the RSS days. So I was there for the transition process where Silicon Valley realized it wasn't just dead, but it was like in this really interesting place to kind of take over. And what I tried to do at first was a startup.
This is Right With? Or were you doing something else?
So it was originally called Unimedia, which I thought was a great...
Love that name.
Unimedia.org. I tried to start it as a nonprofit at the end of my time. So basically in college I had been a writer and editor at my college at the Stanford Daily, and then I was a business manager for a year afterwards. It's this weird one-year position. You get to stay on campus
at the paper.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
okay.
it was like $1 million budget, and it's all fairly like regimented, and you have this weird relationship with the university where you're not owned by them, but you're on their property.
Right.
And
so you can say whatever you want, but you can't say whatever you want.
Yeah, I mean, in general, like you're writing for the Stanford audience, so you're probably not going to write a lot of pro like Berkeley stuff.
Right.
There's that sort of bias.
Or like any logging stories or anything like that, I guess.
So at that point, I had seen Facebook start to blow up towards the end of my senior year, like the end of 2000. When was that? 2004. And I was like, wow, that's ridiculous, and I think I was like the 200,000th. My UDI.
How do you know this stuff?
My ID thing is like, it was fairly early. I actually didn't want to sign up at first because I was like, I already know everybody.
Didn't the first 200,000 or 300,000 get shares in the company or no? Did you not sign up?
I missed.
You may have missed it. Yeah.
Yeah, I didn't log in on the right time. So I ended up like seeing that, and I was like, wouldn't it be cool if you could have this like social network but just for student newspapers? So and they can all share stories, and like all these student
crowdsource stories or something.
Yeah, and I was like, there's a lot of cool stuff, and there's like all these enthusiastic young people working for free on like these. Some of them do really interesting coverage.
Fresh meat.
Yeah, I mean, it's what I had done, and I was like, it feels like there's something there, and like the whole, we don't need to talk about the college newspaper business right now, but it's complicated, and it often doesn't work out in favor of the students. So I was like, we can build this like national organization, and we can like build the software to.
It's like Bleacher Report or something.
Yeah,
for student
actually,
newspapers.
what I wanted to do was to build like really boring productivity software for newsrooms where you could like manage like the whole story writing and editing process. And it was because we were emailing Word documents to each other and then like publishing the wrong Word document in the paper the next day and being like, why is it full of typos and like factual errors? Because we got the wrong Word document. So this is before Writely, which became Google Docs. So I went through this whole convoluted process of like trying to raise money, like not knowing anyone in the nonprofit world, not being able to raise any money, going broke, moving out into the garage of the house I was living with in Mountain View with my roommates.
It's you, or it's you?
It was just me at that point,
and
I was like, at that point, I was just trying to be a nonprofit, trying to like generate interest in the college newspaper community, where I was this young whippersnapper who was acting like he knew it all. Maybe I was. I don't know. I don't know how people perceived me, and
We did. I talked to a lot of people that you had pitched, and there's a lot of whippersnapper comments. Yeah, most people, that's the word they use. It's weird. I haven't heard that word for a long time. So, so you're doing it alone. Did you?
So I was doing it alone, and I basically was like, okay, this isn't working. Like, I need someone to work with, and I was like, which developers do I know? And then I ended up thinking, like, I have this friend from high school, like a good friend of mine. He went to a different college, and he majored in geology. And at that point, he was a whitewater raft guide in Durango. And the season had just ended, and he was about to get laid off from his job moving rocks for a landscape construction firm. And
awesome.
I was like, hey, Phil. His name's Phil Cast. And I was like, hey, Phil, like, you did like computer classes in high school, right? He's like, yeah. He's like, how would you like to teach yourself how to code again and build the Stanford Daily new website? So I got him to build the Stanford Daily new website. He taught himself how to code, and then he became my co-founder in this company, and he's a genius. So he figured it all out, and
that's like a different level above, like, you know, the people that try to find, like, I got to find a technical co-founder. You, like, found a guy and you convinced him to become technical and also your co-founder.
He was
so that's
already
like
super
way
technical.
harder.
Like this guy was like the smartest kid at my high school.
Okay.
So I knew he was like
he had it in him.
He was like definitely, you know, a genius. And you know, he basically taught himself. We ended up getting, like, just piecing together like a total of like $30,000 from like the Canadian like University Press, which is like the student-run national. They gave us like 10,000 Canadian dollars. You know, they got like,
which is not that much.
Well, it was less then. It's more now, I think.
No offense. All our Canadian community out there just turned off the video.
No, they're like, that's right, our dollar's stronger than it was.
Dirtbag Americans.
No, I mean, it was that exchange rate mattered to me at that time. They were really awesome, actually. And, you know, we found a couple people who gave us a little money here and there. And then Phil was starting to read Paul Graham's essays at the time. And I was like, who's Paul Graham? He's like, I don't know. I mean, he's like the god of us. And I was like, okay, cool. And he was like, let's apply to Y Combinator. And I'm like, okay, I'll check it out.
Yeah. So
we did. We ended up, like, you know, spending money we didn't really have to fly out to Boston when they were based out there to interview.
Yeah.
This is like the fall of 2006. And we ended up getting accepted. And he
Wow.
may have come to regret that. But, you know, we went through this whole process of, so we got, like... So,
did he say that, or...
He hasn't said that. No, Phil has gone on to do great things with them.
Yeah.
And
you write about other companies. So.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
But we write about everybody, so promiscuous like that. So the whole saga was basically, I'm sorry if this is boring to you guys. Cut me off.
No, go ahead.
You're the interviewer. So we got into this whole thing, and so that we started like the official like winter of 2007 class of Y Combinator, which is the third class. So we were living in this house in Palo Alto at the time. So we'd go down there like once a week for their meetings, and it was a complicated time because like I had my own ideas of like wanting to like help out college newspapers, and everyone was looking at me funny like, what are you talking about, dude? Like, what are college newspapers? We ended up like building some like products for like more design around like this like complex newsroom with a bunch of bells and whistles, like what you'd see with like a complicated enterprise product.
Yeah.
But our version of it.
Okay.
For what it's worth. We had like a bunch of college newspapers testing that out. It had some like interesting traction, but it was clearly like a really long way before it was going to be any sort of business. And we talked about it with ourselves and with Paul and people, and we're like, okay, we're going to launch a more general product. So we changed the name to Write With, which was a little more palatable.
Yep.
And Phil and another developer we brought in, we convinced him to quit his like IT job at Goldman Sachs.
Oh, wow.
He moved out. He had built something similar for his college newspaper.
Huh.
So he moved out for a few months as well. we launched this new version in like March of 2007. Did the TechCrunch post. Nick Gonzalez, if you know who isn't at TechCrunch anymore, but a friend of ours.
Yeah.
He wrote about it. We got the TechCrunch spike. We got the mean commenters. We got and we got all sorts of random people who said it was cool. So we spent a few more months working on it, and we were like, this is like a 5-year slog to building a small business, and
wasn't worth it.
And we had like a lot of stuff coming at us too. The day before we launched, the Google Docs team had us into Google, and they're like, "You guys are insane for doing anything in our space. Why don't you just join Google? Like this isn't gonna work." And we were like, "Screw you guys. We're gonna do it anyway." Which
which made them want to acquire you after that. Yeah.
So we launched, and it was like it was like looking at the traffic numbers, like, okay, we have like 1 million feature requests. This isn't going very quickly. We are now really broke.
Yeah.
Like broke.
Yeah, YC's like, 16,000.
Yeah, I think it was a little more than that, but it was like, I was like getting close to maxing out my credit cards at that time.
Yeah. So another 2,000 or 3,000.
Yeah, exactly. One of our friends,
just me?
One of our friends, her name's Jess Wolf, who is had done investment banking. Like she was like did another like seed investment in us of like 10,000.
Oh, wow.
So we were like limping along, and eventually we were just like, okay, this isn't working. Phil and Martin Goldman, the other guy, we're getting no relation to the founder of Goldman Sachs.
Sure.
Just wanted to clear that up.
They're not a sponsor. We would take them though. If
they were.
Where are you, Goldman?
Martin's girlfriend was back in New York, and he had lots of cool IT job offers back there, and Phil was getting recruited by other Y Combinator.
Well, it didn't work out, right? I mean,
yeah, it didn't work out. And so the way I got into blogging with all of this was Paul Graham introduced me to Matt Marshall as a potential customer, because I was like, okay, I'll start talking to other media companies.
Yeah.
And it was like, and Matt Marshall was like, well, I just quit the Merck 8 months ago to start VentureBeat, and I'm by myself. So I need writers. I don't need collaboration software with writers.
Sure.
Yet. I'm like, so we worked out this deal where I would write these guest posts, and it would be just about like stuff I was hearing that I thought was interesting, and I would like get to include a little like line at the end that said like Eric Eldon is the co-founder of Write With, and I would include the link to Write With.
Sure.
And I was like,
awesome.
Yes, that'll be my like
that's your distribution.
Little, like, marketing strategy. And then I discovered that like the posts I were writing were like pretty big. Like they were getting a lot of traffic and like hitting Tech Meme and all of these things. And like Phil was like, dude, you're kind of a professional writer. And I'm like, awesome. Like now I have a job if this doesn't work out. As a blogger, great. So by that July, we were just like, yeah.
It wasn't
working.
Still didn't pick up. Still no traction.
So
major traction.
We basically folded. I'm still in the process of shutting down.
Wow.
The state of California, but we, the whole, for the most part, it was done in the summer of 2007, and then VentureBeat.
I mean, what's interesting to me, but just to recap this whole thing, is that, like, founders, they think, these writers, they just don't get it. They don't get it. They don't understand me. And it's like, what's interesting about you, and we've had MG up here, we've had Ben Parr, we've had Adam Lashinsky. You have literally been in the same seat.
Well, MG was
MG's done a few.
One of my first hires at VentureBeat.
Yeah.
And he was a developer.
You found him, right? Like off.
Well,
of
he found himself. That was funny. I think it was like December of 2007, and I'm like, who's this Paris Lemon guy linking to me? And I would like go read his stuff. I'm like, that's pretty smart. So I ended up having to go down to San Diego for like some conference, and I like crashed on his couch when he was like working his web developer job down there.
Yeah.
We got some beers.
Reading movie scripts or something?
Yeah, no, that was after that. And he was like, yeah, sure, it sounds cool. I'm liking this writing gig.
Yeah, that's cool.
So yeah, that's how it happened.
So you go to VentureBeat, you start kind of blogging a lot, and then you're there for 2 years.
That was a crazy experience, because I was like, everything I knew about Silicon Valley, for better or worse, was like, having been in a startup, which is awesome for some of the connections, but also daunting when like it's the main blog read by venture capitalists, and I'm like, I haven't, done any deals of note. I don't know.
You're not an angel investor?
No, definitely not that time.
You could start tonight. I'm sure there's people here that would take your money.
So I end up like just winging it and having to learn like really fast. And it was also like the sort of desperation moment where I'm like, okay, this is like probably what I should be doing instead of like, trying to start another like enterprise software company for a dying section of the enterprise.
Yeah. Well, you're good at it. I mean, it's something you're very good at.
And so it was like, started like one thing led to another, and I mean this is when blogging was much smaller. There was like 3 or 4 people at TechCrunch, and stuff that was a big deal back then was like Robert Scoble being mean to a startup. It was like that was like the controversy of the week. It felt big time to everybody involved then. It certainly felt big time to me, but it was very like small time compared to how big the whole startup movement is.
Well, that happens like every week now, so it's not big anymore.
It's like back then, like everyone was like, no, it's a bubble, guys. Stop writing about web startups. It's a bubble. And it's like that never, when you hear that nowadays, like just know it's always been there. And it's like this like, it's this sort of like cleansing thing for the Valley where it's like we're just going to tell ourselves it's going to be terrible in the future, so be ready for it. I think it's probably healthy.
Yeah. So you're at VentureBeat 2 years, and then I want to get to TechCrunch, but you then move on to Inside Network, right? Tell us a little bit about that.
I found myself covering Facebook a lot. I mean, this is 2008, 2009, and it was like when they like the first article I wrote about them, I think they had like 10 million users, and then obviously they've grown a lot since then. So I was like, this is really interesting. Like, it was like covering their international expansion, like finally getting out of the U.S., all of the things they've done to like get past like, I think they had already launched to high schools and workplaces, but they were like, doing a bunch of other expansion efforts. They launched a platform like shortly after I joined VentureBeat. So it was like, I was like watching that whole thing. I'm like, I don't know what this is all worth, but clearly it's worth something, because tons of people are spending their time on this.
Yeah.
And I know it mattered when I was in college, so I can sort of trace the relevancy of all of it. So Inside Network, I was watching this guy Justin Smith. I didn't know him in college at all, but he had started Inside Facebook in 2006 actually, and I was watching what he was doing, and he was doing these really like smart things that other bloggers frankly were not doing. He was selling content. He would write these marketing guides that were collections of, they started out as collections of posts about like Facebook marketing and sell them to marketers, and he called them the Facebook Marketing Bible. And over time he turned them into these like fuller-fledged products, and he started App Data, which was just using the Facebook API, and over time he would build that up. And I started using his materials for my stories, and I started like finding that he was beating me to stories because he knew the industry better, because he was a developer
and he was seeing data too, right? I mean, he had all this data to back up who was going to grow and who wasn't.
So I was watching him, and I'm like, this is like a super smart way to approach the media business.
Yeah.
And like I think we talked at the first time in like beginning of 2009. And I was like, I'm at that point, TechCrunch Arrington approached MG and I about joining, and I was like, I'm not ready to like, I don't really want to be a blogger at this point. Like, I want to still do something like involved with startups, and I now realize I need to be more media oriented than I had been in my last one. So Justin and I ended up working things out where I joined, as the junior co-founder in I think it was August of 2009.
Yep.
So at that point, like he'd had like a bunch of part-time people writing, and I basically took over like running Inside Facebook, Inside Social Games. We would launch Inside Mobile Apps the next year, and it was awesome. That was a real startup experience. Like, I mean, Phil and Justin are both like world-class like product engineers.
Yeah.
And like, I think a lot of writers don't get the experience, not just of being in a startup, but like working, like how intense it is if you're trying to like push something, and all the work that's involved and all the complexity that most writers don't understand, and just seeing like people who are like that good at what they do, like, because that's what's driving Silicon Valley, right? That's what's driving like Twitter and Facebook and all these big web companies. Is like there's a ton of people who work there who are like brilliant, and it's thousands of their man hours that they put together, and they're not the ones in the headlines or whatever, but they're the ones who make it happen.
Sure.
And you know, the CTOs who are in the background and all of that. And I think that was what I really got out of like both of those experiences, was like, you know, working with like these like A quality like
engineers
products,
and developers
yeah, and like playing a part in helping them ship.
It's cool. So 2009 to 2000, you guys eventually sell Inside Network, which was the kind of the parent company of all these other properties.
Inside Network had like, we had launched Inside Mobile Apps at that point, and that was doing really well. Like we had some full-time writers come on. I was like managing like a team of like 3 full-time writers and a few more part-time writers. And honestly, you know, Justin was looking at the market and sort of, you know, what we were doing, and we could have either, you know, raised probably a venture round and tried to build out a big media company, or we could have sold.
Yeah.
And the offer was a really, really good offer. So, you know, it's one of those decisions every startup makes. You know, we had never raised money, so
not every startup gets to make
there
that
are no investors complaining about how we didn't go big. Yeah. Right, my startup did. My first startup didn't get to me.
Mine don't get to that point.
Well, Rightwith certainly did not.
They end with a letter to the state of California. That's how most of mine. That's the decision.
Don't repossess my bicycle.
So this is the fall 2011, right?
This is spring of 2011.
Spring of 2011.
So we got bought in May, and I was like, I didn't have to stick around. So we did some more, you know, development of like our products and everything, but I'm just like, you know, I'm not really into like, at that time I'm not really into like being a manager at a big media company.
Yeah.
So, you know, I was friends with MG and people at TechCrunch, and I watched that whole implosion, and I'm like, that is a shame. Like, they covered my startup, they cover everybody, or we try to. You know, and they're really, Arrington was there for Silicon Valley before any other reporters gave a shit.
Yeah.
And, you know, it's really, for all of its ups and downs and issues over the years, it's really, like, I felt it was an important institution. A lot of people feel that way. And so I came, I joined as a writer. You know, Schoenfeld twisted my arm. I'm like, at first I was like, can I do freelance? Can I work for 6 months?
Yeah.
I really need a vacation. And I actually walked in there thinking that Schoenfeld and Sarah Lacy were going to be co-editors. And I would be like able to be a writer for a year and then go figure out something else to do and take a vacation.
Yeah. So this is fall. This is like November 2011.
Yeah, November of 2011.
And then by January, February of 2012, which is like not that long ago. I mean, what was going on at TechCrunch? What was happening on the inside 9 months ago?
I don't know. I didn't know a lot about.
Were you tied up somewhere, or what do you mean?
No, I was like, I was back being like a rank and file guy. Like, I'm a writer now, and you know, I was obviously like thinking about it and talking to people. I'm like, this is not a good situation. I think what I should say.
Well, we are in AOL, so yeah.
No, I have my issues with AOL too. I'm happy to talk.
There's
about
a camera piped right into Tim Armstrong's Palm Pre, so.
Apparently he was happy with Disrupt, so I got some points to burn.
Okay. Burn it now.
Give me a second. Gotta warm up. So the whole Pando thing happened. You know, a lot of us talked to Sarah about going there. At that point I was like so uncommitted to a lot of things where I was like, I'm not ready to go be like, you know, do the startup blog thing again.
Yeah.
I've done that twice and it's tough. You know, and we were just watching a bunch of staff leave, and you know, there are obviously a lot of issues. I feel Eric Schoenfeld's a good guy, and I feel, you know, it's tough what happened to him, but you know, it
is what it is.
It's also really hard to run a Silicon Valley oriented site from New York. And like,
yeah.
that's an issue for anyone who tries to do it, no matter how good you are. So there was a bunch of fissures, and when late February, I'm like, okay, I assume this is going to fall apart.
I mean, when you say that, does that mean from like a traffic standpoint? Was it just
dropping
it's
hard
off?
to say. Traffic it dropped off a lot from the previous fall because there was.
But that's what happens, right? Isn't it? Doesn't it kind of ramp and then drops at the beginning of the year?
I mean, the other thing about TechCrunch had absolutely crushed it. MG he's always on fire, but he was working full time towards the end of 2011. All of the Apple stuff going on at Apple, TechCrunch's own drama, there's this whole tornado of stuff happening.
Yeah.
And then after that, it was just more and more key people leaving. So
okay.
We were kind of stuck with the situation of not everyone can leave, or I'm leaving too, you're leaving too, and so the writers would talk to each other, and
why are people leaving? Is it the TechCrunch had lost its vision, had lost its focus,
some of it,
or?
I mean, it was some of the AOL stuff. It was just a bunch of internal fighting. It happens at every organization. I don't think I've talked about this publicly before, and I'm not sure how much I should be saying.
We're not filming.
Whatever.
So.
Yeah, you are. What's that?
Audio good, John?
So it just degenerated into a lot of fights that didn't need to happen. And where it got to me was I had more, my very limited editing experience at VentureBeat and Inside Network turned out to be more than what other people had in the room who were left. And literally one weekend, I found out my grandpa had lung cancer, and I went to visit him in Arizona, and I'd found another startup guy who I wanted to work with, and I was on the plane back, it was that Monday or Tuesday, I was drafting this whole proposal to this guy about what we could do, and I was assuming TechCrunch was screwed. And that Saturday I get a call from a guy at AOL who's hey, it's definitely not working as is.
Yeah.
So we're gonna make a change. Do you want the job? And I was and I was, there was enough support from people I knew. I knew a lot of writers. I was friends with a lot of writers from over the years, where I felt it was better to try to fix it up than to just let it die. I felt Silicon Valley needed it, and the worst that would happen would be well, this Eric guy who nobody knows came in and tried. And
the other Eric. And
it was it was a tough situation and it didn't work. Well, it was best case scenario, it works well enough to keep going.
Yeah. And this was you are a co-editor, right? Or how does that how does that function?
I hate doing stage stuff. I'm generally I don't my interest in as a writer and as an entrepreneur is building things or getting to the bottom of a story. It's not being the most famous or whatever. That's just not something I care about that much.
Yeah.
And Alexia, she's a very gifted writer. She's super inspirational, and she is really ambitious. And I think she generates a lot of different opinions. She can be polarizing, but she has a quality that a lot of people don't have, which is she always keeps trying to learn, and she tries to fix her mistakes.
Yeah.
And I took a ton of heat from all sides when she became co-editor, and I think it has worked.
And in part of that role is that when you guys, because sometimes you co-author blog posts, do you guys switch off words? Is it
no,
I and then you say the next word? How does that work?
The person whose name comes first in those co-authored posts usually cares about it more.
Okay.
We don't do many of those. In general, TechCrunch was in this weird thing where there whatever people who had didn't like it for whatever reason were praying for its downfall, and then I get in there and some of the Sean Feld too is Sean Feld one of the many unfair things about what happened to him is that he actually did a great job of recruiting people.
Yeah.
And I mean not just myself.
Sure.
Mostly.
But
no, I mean he like got other people from Inside Network. He got like
Kim, right?
Yeah, he got Josh Constein.
Yeah.
Anthony Ha, who I'd worked with, Ingrid London.
Yeah.
From Paid Content. Like he did it definitely pissed off some of the other blogs, but he did a really good job
at poaching.
Of like seeing people and like starting to rebuild the team.
Yeah.
And I don't know if it would have worked as it was, but when I came in, there was like this branch of people who were very, like the old TC who are still there and who were like had enough loyalty, enough belief in it to want to stick around. And there was like all of these writers who had worked together at other publications or had competed against each other, but had like gone to the same press events and had hung out. And so it was like, we can just we could reframe it as being something different.
Yeah.
As being like, this is this new generation where, it's a bunch of like young, like fun, hopefully pretty talented people. So that's what we did, and that's how we've done recruiting since then. And the things we would say, it's like, hey, it's this big platform. For the most part, AOL leaves us alone. And you get to work with a fun team who's very motivated. So
well, I mean, one of the really interesting things too is that it's immediately as soon as it happened. I mean, even in the comments on that post, which I reread again today, but I remember reading it when it first happened, was the first comment is Arrington, making a joke about it, but he's basically saying, hey, this guy's a good guy,
Yeah.
And so it was interesting that that transition brought him back, which. And he was a big part of Disrupt.
Yeah.
A huge part of Disrupt.
He sometimes he brings it on himself, but he gets way too much shit. He's a really good guy. He, and this is, this is his baby. He really didn't mean to create the whole controversy with Pando. Like, I don't think none of us expected that.
Yeah.
I regret that too. I've been in that position, and it's hard.
Yeah.
But, Arrington, you'll have to ask him about that. But what I'll say is that he's been, like, I don't know. I've seen a side of him that's just, like, really awesome.
Okay. And they work in the office, right? The Crunch Fund is in the office, or no? They're not there?
Kind of, yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
I think they're squatting now.
Does he have, is that not known?
No,
they're pretty open about it.
Yeah.
Does he get involved? Does he get
I know he every now and then he sends me like these like funny things like, hey, you guys should do a post about this. But it's like kind of the same as any other like investor who we know.
Yeah.
Where it's like he obviously has extra credibility because he's TechCrunch, but he lives up in Washington most of the time. MG's in the office all the time.
Yeah.
But he's a columnist.
Okay.
So my view of Crunch Fund is that they're like, TechCrunch has always been, arguably too close with a lot of people in Silicon Valley. They had their friends or enemies, whatever. For me, I've tried to get away from that some and like make people feel really I always had a lot of confidence in what they wrote, but I've tried to like, have enough people on the team with enough different perspectives, with enough freedom where there's never going to be this issue of like, Eric Eldon is behind the scenes censoring everything.
Sure.
I think for the most part we've managed to avoid that. There'll always be like some arguments I'll get in with writers or whatever, but people generally have a lot of free reign to do what they want.
Yeah.
And we try to cover startups obsessively. We cover, every investment. We cover, every product launch we can. So Crunch Fund in terms of operations is in the mix with everybody else.
Yeah.
They're, if SV Angel invests in somebody, that's probably worth looking at. Or if, David Lee from SV Angel sends me an email like, hey, I haven't invested in this company, but they're pretty cool. You should check them out. I'll probably check them out.
Yeah.
Or I'll send them to a writer. And it's the same with Mike, right? Like
yeah, sure. He has credibility.
Yeah. So I don't know. I'm happy taking heat for that because I don't really feel like I'm, conflicted in any way about it.
So by far the biggest thing.
And he gets mad when I don't cover some of the stuff he sends. But
I'm sure he does. Yeah. Or doesn't he? I know we've never seen him mad. Does he get mad?
Or he's like, you didn't like that tip I sent. I'm like, sorry, dude, it didn't work out. Like,
does he send it to tips at TechCrunch like everybody else? Yeah.
So like 30 writers who just email.
CC's everyone. Someone will get it. So TechCrunch, and we're going to get to kind of how you get on TechCrunch, because that is by far the
You guys
thing that
didn't
people
care
are
about any
so
of this.
interested in.
I'm sorry.
Well, I do. So
I'm sorry for
they
the
can.
backstory.
If people want to leave, they can leave. They can. They'll in the meetup. This event sucked. They won't. I don't think they will. Maybe that guy in the back. So 7 years ago, it was Arrington on his couch writing about startups, things he thought were cool, things he wanted to invest in. You know, what is TechCrunch today? How has it changed? You know, where do you see it today? What is TechCrunch? What is the?
So we'll always have our mandate. We'll always have our mandate. Do I need this?
Yeah.
We'll always have our mandate of covering, you know, obsessively covering startups. We have a team in Europe now. We've been slowly building up. We're going to add somebody in Taiwan pretty soon here. We have a large team in Silicon Valley. Like, we really try to read and look into everything we get, regardless of who you are. So David Lee, or, you know, we don't need a recommendation.
Or Bill Lee.
Yeah.
Yeah. You'd write about Bill Lee's startup too, right?
We'd be down.
Is it? I mean, you have.
It's really so the way, like, just structurally the way it works right now, and we need to improve this, I would say. But all the writers get emails that come into tips at TechCrunch. We all look through them for things to cover. People pick out stuff they want to cover and they write about it. And very often, the only time there's any oversight with that process is when the copy editor, which Schoenfeld made a smart move by hiring, edits it after they publish.
Okay.
So very often, like, there's no oversight, and we count on the writer to do a good job. The way we police that, first of all, is like who we hire. Second of all, if there's like any issues, if we have like readers who are like, this writer there's issues with their posts, that they did a bad job of it. You know, they say that in the comments, they email me, I see it on Twitter, it gets out there somehow. We'll talk to the writer and we'll change things.
Yeah.
But in general, our strategy, and this is the way, you know, I think a lot of blogs work these days, is you just try to have writers who can handle it, and they know how to write. They know, like, what's, you know, ethical or not. Like, you're not writing about your friend's startup.
Right.
Or if, you know, in the rare case where that somehow happens, you're fully disclosing it. You're not investing. None of us are investors, right? I
don't know.
I have a little bit of money in a friend's farm in Oregon, and that's it. So, full disclosure.
Do they have a website?
Yeah, they do. It's called Afton Field Farms.
Did you just picture it? Say it into the camera.
Afton Field Farms. The best sustainable meat producer.
Sustainable meat.
In Oregon, yeah.
Wow.
It's a friend of mine from like
cool.
since I was 1 year old.
Awesome.
Yeah, so.
You guys, I mean, one of the big criticisms that you guys have is that, you know, when Arrington was writing this 2 or 3 years ago, they had so many fewer writers, so there was so much less content. Like when I go to TechCrunch in the afternoon,
we're working
on
a redesign. It's ridiculous.
I can't possibly read everything. Yeah,
it's ridiculous. We're working on a redesign.
Okay.
I mean, I think every big publication that has this much of a flow of content is, you know, moving towards more of a magazine style format where you have a few big stories featured on top, and then you have like a gradually descending like range of stories that have some sort of categorization visible to them, right? So you can see like here's the column for media and here's a column for enterprise and all of that. Yeah, we have, the way I feel about TechCrunch right now is we've like done the basics of the turnaround, and like now it's the redesign. It's like adding some more structure, not a ton of structure, to the editorial staff. You know, I think we should do some more hiring. I can fight with AOL about that. You know, so I think we're through like the rockiest part, but we have a lot of work left to do, and I'm sorry that people have to bear with us while that happens, but we can't do it all at once.
Sure.
So,
okay.
You know, I think it's fair. You know, in terms of like pitching to TechCrunch or whatever.
Well, can I ask you one more thing, and then let's get to that, because we'll talk about pitching. What in terms of the other criticism is just this idea that a lot of this stuff is press releases, or that, you know, there are so many posts because so many startups are getting funded, and those are the main things to cover. Is that not every post is about funding, but so many of them are. Is that, you know, is that good for TechCrunch? Is that good for?
It's always attention, and it's something we wrestle with, right? Like for 2 years at Inside Network, all I did was cover, you know, social. And I got away from all of this, and it was entirely industry oriented, and we, it's a whole different ballgame. And I thought in a lot of ways that was better.
Yeah.
Because we could write much longer posts and only do a few posts a day and all of that. I think you're watching TechCrunch wrestle with the same formatting problems that every major media company has always had, and particularly has online.
Mm-hmm.
For the funding stuff, like, they're not stories, right? There's news in there, and honestly, like, if you're an entrepreneur, getting funding that's a milestone.
Yeah, it's a huge deal.
That's one of the biggest. So our core audience really cares about those stories because you're like trying to learn about what that company does and like how well they're doing, and like, any insight you can get from like some investors bet on these guys and here's what they're doing, that tells you a lot about the market, right? So there's a lot of people who do think that those things are valuable. Like, another type of post that a lot of people would like to see us do more of is like the how-to posts, like how to be an entrepreneur. And historically we've run more of those on the weekends. We don't do a ton of those right now, and those sort of like guide, like evergreen posts, they can be really good, but honestly there's Startup Grind, right? There's all the investors who have their own blogs providing advice. There's a wealth of information about this stuff, and is that, like, the question I have to ask myself is, are we better at providing advice to entrepreneurs than all of these other people? I don't think we are. Like, I have been a minimally successful entrepreneur, and none of the other writers have been. Most of the other writers haven't been, so haven't done it. So it's like, who are we to be telling people how to do startups, right? Like, we could do more interviews. We could do.
Right.
Is that getting at what you're saying?
Yeah, that makes sense.
Because it's just this. That stuff isn't news per se, and it's like a lot of it these days is way overgeneralized and pretty at least in my opinion, pretty useless.
Well, and with so you talked about the TechCrunch bounce, with your first company, and my experience is we got written about in 2009, early 2009 or 2010 maybe, and there was this huge, massive bounce, and then we got written about a separate product a year and a half later, and I wouldn't have. There was a bounce, but it wasn't like, and maybe it was just our story. It probably was, because that thing just completely failed. So it wasn't an interesting product. But does that still happen? Do people? Is the TechCrunch bounce still? Yeah, we have still what it was 2 or 3 years ago.
I mean, so our traffic in September depends which measure you look at, but we set a few records and we got close on a lot of it. Like, it was either our first or second best month by most measures. So awesome. we still get a ton of traffic. There's a ton of noise right now in the startup world in general. So a lot of it, I mean, everyone needs to be
more
like
competition,
pretty, and you need to be hard on yourself. I'm like, are you writing about something that's really going to get that many people's attention?
Yeah.
And the other thing is, like, a lot of businesses, you don't, like, I've ran into entrepreneurs over the years who I've covered, or, at publications I've worked at, or who have been covered by TechCrunch, who've been like, that one post, which didn't get very much traffic and was boring to most people, found the right users, and now they have this like crazy awesome business going. Nobody knows about it, and hopefully they'll like, we'll find more out about it later on.
Yeah.
But like, it just depends. Like, if you're trying to be the next Instagram, like, you might get a bounce, but probably not. And I wouldn't suggest trying to be the next Instagram. But if you have like, if TechCrunch does I'd say other blogs, if they do a post on you and you're like this, like, I'm sorry to say it, but like this niche enterprise software product, like,
gosh, that sounds cool.
For newsrooms.
Oh, sick. For schools?
It's gonna be awesome.
Like school newsrooms?
Yeah.
Oh, I need that.
It'll be like, there's a good chance you'll hit like a good core of those readers. Yeah. Because like a lot of people read about startups now, and like people in businesses are trying to figure out tools that they can use that matter to them. And like, not every entrepreneur is focused on those people, but a lot of people are. Yeah. So I don't know. I would never. This is a great example of it. Like, I think it was like Christmas Eve of 2008, and it was like long after Write With. I get a call, long distance. I'm at home in Oregon, and I get a call from this guy in Poland who has found the Write With site because we had left it running. And he was like, this is the best product ever. How do I pay you to use it? Like, what's the plan? Like, just let me know what I can do. And I'm like, oh my God. You know, it's because I think he found it like via TechCrunch.
Yeah.
And it's like, that's the kind of thing that happens. Just getting a blog post out there, like, it'll affect your search results. You never know who's reading it. I know that like a large majority of like the people that startups want reading it are reading it.
Yeah.
Investors, whoever. So
the value's still there.
A lot of it, I mean, it's not, I'm not saying TechCrunch has a monopoly on it, but I know I get a ton of stories from people who are like, yeah, we got this awesome spike, but a lot of that spike is like, what's your plan for building off of it, right? This is a problem with traffic spikes. I mean, we have it as a publication. Like, how do you take that, you know, temporary interest and channel it into something long term? And you're always going to have a lot of attrition. You're always going to have like most of your people are going to leave again. But you know, it's about like having a good enough product to capture those core users, and you build on that, and hopefully you can get some more press later. But a lot of companies never need press, and a lot of companies only need 1 or 2 hits.
Sure.
So obviously if you're doing consumer web or mobile, it's more important to like go for press. I personally, it's in my interest to say it's always worth getting press, but I wouldn't.
Yeah, certainly it's not.
It's like,
well, if you don't need it,
and
I
like
mean,
honestly, like people, it's just sort of like it's one of those artificial milestones, like funding events, where it really can matter to your startup.
Yeah.
But what really matters is your product and your team and how you handle it. And looking at these other things as like what's going to make or break you is the wrong way to do it.
Yeah.
And I think everyone knows that deep down inside, but a lot of people just get lost in the hype, and you got to fight that.
I'm going to talk to you about one more thing, and then we'll take some questions, and then we'll finish up. I just want to walk through with you, just very systematic. You know, somebody here, you know, a founder, and they want to know what is the process for getting on TechCrunch. I know you guys have written about this, talked about this, but let's just if we could just quickly walk through it at a very basic level. Let's say I'm a ultra talented founder, you know, and I'm building a tech-based product that fits the target market of TechCrunchers. So I believe. What do I need to get started? You know, do I need to have a product, for instance? Just, you know, walk through a couple of these things with us. Can I get an article on TechCrunch with just funding, you know, and without a product? Can I get a story with a great product and no funding? What do I need? What do I need to kind of break through to like make this happen?
There's no formula. Sorry. I think I don't know. You can always email into tips, or you can hire a PR firm to harass us, or you can like.
But I feel like
reply us on Twitter,
okay.
Or you can do all of those things that are known already, and it might work. But it's really like
how many stories have you written? Well, you're not writing a tremendous amount, but like take one of the other writers. How many stories would they have written this year from an @ reply on Twitter? Any idea? Like
I actually
a handful, dozens.
I don't ask them.
But you think it does happen?
Yeah. I look at all that stuff.
Yeah.
What a lot of people do is they get like the types of emails that I see that are just depressing are the ones where it's like 1,000-word disposition on why my startup is awesome. I've written those to press before.
Sure.
It's not a good idea. Like,
we've got a few people in the audience ready to hand you one of those tonight.
It's honestly like you honestly just gotta sum it up. Like, even if it's a complex thing, it's part of your job as an entrepreneur to figure out how to sum it up in a way that other people can understand. It's tough. Writing is tough.
Yeah.
Writers hate writing. Dirty secret. It's really hard to sum up complex ideas into a small number of words that are easy to understand. And being able to do that effectively is like a 4-sentence email I get from somebody like,
that strikes the right chord.
It's not just, it answers all the obvious questions, like here's why it's not another Instagram. We have videos. That wouldn't work. But you see what I mean? Like,
well, Well, it seems like, I mean, just my experience with it, and correct me if I'm wrong, it seems like, kind of gentle persistence meshed with what you're talking about, like simplicity, where the problem is like you have people that say, okay, I'll send you, no problem, I'd love to send you a 4-sentence email. And it's like, you feel like on the other end somebody's getting it and they're like, oh my gosh, really? Like he sends a tip in with 4 sentences? Like what a lazy founder.
Well, 4 sentences.
He can't even come up with anything better to describe his startup
No,
than
I wouldn't
4
say
sentences.
that. I wouldn't say that.
Okay.
Okay, let's do 2 paragraphs.
That's the max? What is that?
It's just like
150 words?
You gotta not look like a press release written by somebody who doesn't understand the product. You have to just say why it matters. And and here's the tough reality: it might not matter. It might suck.
Yeah.
And there's a good chance we'll write about it anyway. We've written about plenty of stuff that sucks, including things I've done, but
yeah, or me,
or not written about things I've done. I'm like my job and our job at TechCrunch is to try to be on the side of the entrepreneur, but that's a concept, right? It's not being on the side of each of you individually all of the time for whatever you want. It's being there to help the ecosystem, right? And at some level to try to cut down on the noise and point people to what matters.
Yeah.
And a lot of times that means saying no, and it sucks. It'll suck for me when I do my next startup and my friends in the press are like, this is dumb, I'm not going to cover it, or I don't have time to respond to your email. That's going to happen to me again.
Well, it might, but probably not. I mean, this is the other thing is a lot of these examples you're talking about, like David Lee emails you or Arrington emails you, these are all relationship-based referrals.
That happens. Yeah, that happens
but
too.
does it happen? Because I feel like when I read about something, I can say, I try to back into it,
how did it get there?
Yeah, how did this happen? And did this person send it to tips? It's like, no, probably not. Did the writer find this on Hacker News? Maybe. Did Arrington email and say, write about my startup?
You know what we
Maybe.
do? A lot of what we try to do is just hit the streets. And so Josh Constein, Anthony Ha, Ryan Lawler, Colleen Taylor, Kim I. Cutler.
Rip
when he shows up. Are you watching this, Rip? Myself,
Definitely
when I
not.
can, everybody's going out to events all the time and trying to take meetings and trying to meet new people. And Josh, the Rap Genius guys, he met those guys not because of an introduction, because he had a meeting in a restaurant and he heard them talking the table next to him, and he came up to them and asked them. So we're on the prowl. We're for sure looking.
Was that at Creamery or where was that?
I have no idea.
Okay. I think it was probably at the Creamery.
It's probably the Creamery. But we're constantly going to events and trying to meet people and trying to have our ear to the street. So we're out there, and
founders should be too.
Yeah, it's not always what you have to do. Obviously it always helps to network and convince people who are better connected that they should help you out. But it's really startups are hard, and it's when everyone's trying to do them, it's hard to stand out from the crowd, and there's no magic formula. Some people it's going to be press, some people it's just going to be focusing on the product and the few users who you care about. Yeah, and honestly, there have been so many people we've covered, or who TechCrunch has hyped up over the years, or other press has hyped up over the years, who have not who have met bitter endings for other reasons. Press is actually really dangerous.
They
sometimes.
died or something, or what do you mean?
Well, they had an embarrassing failure.
Okay.
It's fine to have a failure, but it's tougher to swallow when you have gone out and declared yourself the future.
Sure.
Right, and so that's the problem with press, right? Is it something you really want? You guys got to ask yourselves that. If do you really want that kind of attention for the stage you're at? And oftentimes people overestimate its importance.
Let's give Eric a big round of applause. Thanks, man. You could do some questions. Yeah. Do you want to just come right here in the middle, and we'll get you on with the microphone so that we can hear it on the video?
Hi, and oh, by the way, so you guys are in Taiwan. I was there the same week. Unfortunately, I couldn't make it,
yeah,
but
John Biggs
I wanted to know. I'm actually connecting with some of the entrepreneurs there,
Okay.
and I wanted to know what your plans were in terms of working with Taiwan, considering a majority of the people there don't speak English.
We have. I probably shouldn't be saying this, but basically somebody local who speaks Mandarin.
Okay. Oh no, what is the plan?
They're just going to be general assignment. Like, they would be helping us with like whatever other coverage we need, and also just looking around for going to local startup events. You know, trying to track stuff more generally in East Asia. So we're trying to get more global.
Hi, my name is Trish. I was wondering whether you're interested in exclusives. Does that help in the pitching?
It does.
Okay.
I mean, I should talk about that a little bit more. I mean, a lot of times, it's not that we have to like hoard every little bit of information, but if we write about something that's already been written about, everyone will be like, "What are you guys doing?" Like, I read this somewhere else. And sometimes we'll do it anyway. A lot of times we'll usually we'll try to find our own way to take it forward. We do accept embargoes. Like, exclusives aren't like the way you'll get covered, but it does make a difference. It can.
Hi, two questions. One is that during the past year, so far we see fewer and fewer articles on TechCrunch with the subjective opinions, with very strong personal opinions. So why is that? Do you think it's necessary just to offer some very strong opinions instead of these kind of the just press release relating things?
Yeah, it's fair. I think it depends on the writer, what they want to do. A lot of us these days are, I would say, more mild-mannered about our tech opinions. We have a few things we're going to be working on in that direction. I think I have a lot of opinions, and all of us do. So we'll probably be doing more opinion pieces in the future. And I agree, it's something we need to work on.
Is the traffic at TechCrunch driven more by personalities and authors, or by the news that they're actually covering?
It's some of each. I'd say it's weighted towards news.
Okay.
Still one more question to catch up.
Yeah.
You just said you have already had some guys in Taiwan, right?
No.
No.
We have. I think she was referring to a trip.
Yeah, they're talking about
one of our writers made recently.
So why don't you start from China if you wanted to get in touch with the Asian market?
China.
Since I'm originally from China.
We would love to be in China, and we've actually talked to some people there about doing something. We still might. As you know, it doesn't always. First of all, as a journalist, I'm not sure. I've been there once, and I didn't say I was a reporter. From what I've heard, it's extremely difficult to get press passes. So, that there are the circumstances there beyond our control that make it difficult to cover. Obviously the language thing. We would like to do more of it. That's what I'll say.
Okay.
Regardless of any of the difficulties or like issues on our end or whatever, we want to do more of it. And Taiwan is frankly just more accessible.
Okay. We'll do one more here. Adon.
So I'm going to ask the opposite question from what he asked. Some people say that TechCrunch used to be much more controversial.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think it's true?
Yeah. There's no replacing Arrington. I don't find controversy as interesting. You don't
think the drama brings
it can be really good. I'm maybe too earnest about it, but I generally I want to do a clean job of covering startups. I want to be respected for it. I don't want to go to sleep at night getting a bunch of hate mail, and I get it anyway, of course, but that stuff really takes a toll on you. It's taken a toll on Mike, and I think Alexia doesn't mind getting dramatic. Some of our writers don't mind getting dramatic, but not everybody wants to do that. Not everyone wants to be that person. So we'll probably get more, do more opinion-y pieces. But the thing I want to see us do more of in general is do deeper pieces, and like, pieces that are engaging, but are over 1,000 words and involve like a lot of reporting. And honestly, the situation we've come into has made it really hard to do that on top of our mandate of covering everything we can. So, I mean, those of you who have read me at VentureBeat and Inside Network know that that's generally how I've skewed in the past, and that's what I want to get back to when I can.
Let's give Eric another big round of applause. Thanks for coming.